Today, we're delighted to host a conversation about regenerative food systems between Jose Corona and Daniel Enking. Jose Corona is Chief Agricultural Business Officer at the APC, a flagship initiative of the Office of Cat Taylor, working to strengthen climate resilient, farmer led food systems. Raised in California's agricultural heartland as the sum of family farmers, he brings decades of cross sector leadership spanning philanthropy, public service, impact investing, and agricultural enterprise. Jose will go into more detail about the APC in discussion with Daniel. Daniel Enking is an entrepreneurial, permaculturist, and business operations professional. In 2018, he co-founded Everflex Technologies with a farmer to turn food waste into biofertilizer and help farmers transition to using regenerative practices. Daniel is certified in advanced permaculture design and helps manage a community garden in the Santa Cruz area. He's a founding member of the Work on Climate Bay Area Food Systems chapter. Jose and Daniel, we're looking forward to learning from you.
All right. Thanks so much, Julie. And really excited to see everybody joining here from around the world and a lot of people in the Bay Area. So that's exciting. And Jose, so glad we're getting to have this conversation now. So
Thanks for
let's just
having me.
start. Yeah, absolutely. Let's just start at the beginning. How I'm curious how growing up in Watsonville, from what I understand, kind of shaped your approach to the work that you're doing today, growing up among farmers.
No, thanks. First of all, thank you for having me today. And yeah, I was seeing the chat go through of all the people from around the world. It's amazing to see everybody dialing. So I know everybody's busy and you can be spending time doing other things, especially around the other side of the world. You're probably like at nighttime. So thanks for joining us. It means a lot that you're here to listen to the conversation. As Daniel said, yeah, I grew up in Watsonville with a family that emigrated from Mexico, from Michoacan, and came here to the U.S. just for a better opportunity. And for them, they used agriculture, working in strawberry fields in Watsonville as a way to improve the lives for myself and my brothers. I grew up. Working in the fields all the way through college. I went to UC Davis, but all my spring breaks, there was no Cancun spring breaks for me. There was no summer vacations for me. It was always back at the farm. At that time, I felt like I resented my parents for making me work at the farm. But fast forwarding to now, I could not have asked for a better upbringing and the values that my parents instilled in me, what I learned from him as a farmer, from the farm workers that worked with him, how they farmed was important to them. So, I didn't put the connected dots together and throughout my career, and being back in agriculture now, supporting family farmers like my mom and my dad and others around it when I was growing up. I see why, life happens that way. How my parents taught me how to farm and the love they showed to the land, and how he actually really cared about the soil, in that how important that was to him. Back then I was just, kind of rolled my eyes and like, whatever, dad. But now I really see that, he was really growing and stewarding the land in the way that his family, his ancestral roots taught him how to do that. And just it happened to be that he translated that from Mexico to the US. So I really loved, remembering all the memories that I had with my dad growing up. So how I approach the work now is I feel like I'm having conversations with my parents. So it feels like a full circle moment for me in my life to be in this role. And I feel extremely lucky and humbled for being working around so many amazing family farmers around the Bay Area and around the Central Valley.
Awesome. Yeah, that's an amazing story. And I can connect somewhat to my childhood. We didn't own a family farm. I didn't have to work spring breaks there, but we did have an organic garden growing up, and I was surrounded by a lot of organic farms. And so, kind of seeing that love for the land, like you describe, and for the soil and for enriching the soil is something that I just grew up around, and just so it kind of intuitively makes sense to me. Excuse me. So, now that you're having these conversations with farmers, not everybody grew up in this way. And so there is sometimes a perceived trade-off that people have, I think, between environmental goals and economic prosperity. And
Mhm.
so when you're having these conversations, how do you talk to people who might have been farming in a different way, sometimes even for generations, and kind of, know a different way of farming? How do you talk to them about changing their practices?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that most of the work that we do right now with APC, the Agriculture Platform Collective, is an effort right now centered in the Central Valley. The Central Valley, for the most part, I wouldn't say all, but it has a large swath of conventional farming. So it's not regenerative, not organic as we all define it. But again, going back to my dad, back then we didn't call it this, but the crop rotation, which is one of the principles of regenerative agriculture and how you improve soil, my dad really, parceled his land and for a year he used, 20 acres. He would not grow anything. He would rotate, it would grow strawberries here, and then the next 2 years he would leave it vacant and grow green beans only to improve the soil, which gave him a better product, which then created a better market for him at a better pricing. So I think back then I didn't really connect the dots, but that's really the conversation that we have with farmers right now is that transitioning to these practices is not only good for the soil and good for the environment, but it's good for the economics because the market demand for better product, for better produce, for more healthier produce grown in a better way is actually good economically. So you want to have these conversations, but at the end of the day, you have to understand where these farmers are coming from too, is they're looking for that market. So if you can't connect a market to them, then why would they want to transition to these practices? So at the end of the day, I think sometimes we forget when we talk about climate or regenerative agriculture, we talk about the environment and climate in general, but there's a real strong economic argument for the farmer to transition in this
Hmm.
direction because the market is demanding that more and more. And by the way, it actually provides better pricing too. So whether you go, you sell through a farmer's market, through a retail operation, or you sell to institutions like hospitals, universities, or schools, they're demanding healthier produce. So that comes with better pricing as well. So if you connect all those dots with the farmers, they get it. It's not a hard sell for them.
Hmm.
One, they already,
Hmm.
most of them grow that way. They just don't call it regenerative. They don't call it organic. It's
Hmm.
just the way they farm. That's how they learned in
Hmm.
their, whether they're coming from Southeast Asia, in Fresno and in the Central Valley, there's a big Hmong population that grow amazing produce, and they grow in the practices they learned back in their homelands. Same thing like my dad. That's how they grow. They don't have the nomenclature that you and I have around calling it regenerative. That's just how they grow, and it makes sense for them.
Hmm.
And yeah, again, you start connecting the dots around the economics around it. So, farming is a great profession. It has to make economic sense and it has to make ecological sense too.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how a lot of these different cultures around the world, they come with these this knowledge of these like traditional practices, and then in the US here we call it regenerative farming or permaculture, but it's really all the same thing.
Mhm.
Um, so what are some of the biggest struggles then, would you say, that you're seeing with these farmers, just in their farming practice, but also as they're trying to transition?
There's a few things. The biggest one that we see is just we work in the Central Valley with about 40 to 50 farmers that range from, as little as half an acre. I think the largest one we work with is, close to 100 acres. So you're talking about small family farmers. So the average is about 10 acres. So still small operations. The biggest challenge that we see in the context that we're talking about around transitioning to regenerative agriculture is that many of these farmers don't have access to long-term tenure to the land. So
Mm.
many of these farmers are on year-to-year leases. They don't have long-term tenure. So they get moved around in plots. So where they farm this year, is not where they may be farming next year. So for them, it's hard for them to make these investments into these practices when they know that they don't know whether they're going to reap the benefits of those investments because they get moved around a lot. So they don't have that land security that
Mm,
landowners do. So that's another area that we work on is figuring out like how do we get them access to long-term tenure to land. So land access
mm,
and long-term tenure access is a big, big barrier to helping small farmers transition to these practices. If you talk about just
mhm,
organic in general, it's a 3-year process.
mm,
And if you don't have
mhm,
a 3-year lease at the very minimum, then why would a farmer invest those resources into these practices? So that's a big
mhm,
struggle. Land access is one. Also,
mhm,
there's it's expensive to some of them. So again, we're talking to very small farmers. That transition is expensive. So access to the right kind of capital and resources is another way, another barrier that we see for these small farmers. But I think the largest one is more just it's more around the narrative. Having them understand that they're part of a community and that this actually makes sense for themselves, for their family, for the community, for the world. If you make that case and they buy into it, then all the other things are solvable. With the right
mhm,
connection, with the right network, with the right capital. And I think many in this, that are listening in today can help in some way, and we can talk about that later on. But I think that having these farmers feel like they're part of a community is important. My
mhm,
dad didn't have that back then. I remember that because it was one of the few people that we talked about how do you do this, how do you farm differently. Now it's part of a movement. So I feel like you know having them connect to a community is really important, and I'm hoping that we can talk about that later too.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And so I imagine there must be like a marketing component too of like, helping these farmers to distinguish, the produce that they're growing. I mean, organic, they're certified organic, but when they're, on the regenerative side, I mean, there's a lot of regenerative certifications out there, but there's no real there's not like one standard for that. And so is there a struggle on the marketing side too to kind of distinguish their products from other farmers?
Yes, I think the short answer is yes. There's a marketing component to the work that needs to happen. And again, that's kind of part of what I'm talking about, building the community. I think these
Mhm.
certifications, whether it's organic and now it's regenerative or organic, it just sometimes it's prohibitive to some of these farmers to get that certification.
Mm,
And
mhm,
they may be practicing every single thing that takes them certification, but to get the certification is expensive again.
mhm,
So what we try to do is educate the market. Whether we're talking to a hospital, we have a great pilot that we started with UC Merced in the Central Valley. And it took us about a year to have these conversations with them and saying, these are the kind of farmers that we work with. They grow with the practices that everyone would call regenerative or organic certified. They just they don't have the resources or capacity to be certified. So they're not
mhm,
certified organic or certified regenerative. But come for yourselves and see the land, taste the product, look for yourself. So it's an education process for the market. So I think that needs to happen too.
mhm,
That
mhm,
I think there needs to be some leeway and kind of meet the farmers where they're at and take, I wouldn't say a risk, but just do things differently. It doesn't have to be that everything has to be certified. There's things that I know that are certified that are still a bad product. So I think
mhm, mhm,
making the case that certification is not the end goal, it could be to some, but not to all, is a big part of the work that we do is educating the market that everything doesn't have to be certified. And you can see for yourself if you're able to see these farmers and see their land and then learn their practices, you'll know that they're growing in the way that you want them to grow.
mm. Yeah, and I imagine this is where really localizing food systems can help a lot,
Yes.
right? Because yeah, if you're buying from a farmer who's in your neighborhood or in your city at least, it's much easier to have that visibility on what kind of practices that they're using versus buying food from, hundreds of miles away.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right, Daniel. I think that part of the larger systems level work that we're trying to grade is to make the case that the supply chains, the work that happens around agriculture, how it gets from the product to the end consumer, we have to think more regionally. Right now, there's a movement towards consolidation. So more and
Hmm.
more, the big ag, as I call it, is coming in and taking over the system and, making the case that cheaper is better. And what we're trying to make the case, with the APC, with like, these are 40 farmers in the Central Valley. Maybe one or farmer cannot meet the need of a UC Merced or a hospital, but if we aggregate and these farmers work collectively among themselves to meet the
Mm-hmm.
procurement needs of the market at a more regional basis, it's good for the market. It's good for UC Merced. It's good for the hospital. It's good for a company like Sprouts. They get it. So it doesn't all have to be consolidated. And I think that's just part of the kind of the capitalist system that there's more consolidation happening, including in the ag sector.
Hmm.
So part of the broader systems change that we're trying to create is how do we regionalize economies so that
Hmm.
we have the APCs of the world, there's a large movement around food hubs that also work together to aggregate smaller producers to meet bigger procurement needs of other markets. How do we connect with more food hubs? How do we regionalize the agriculture ecosystem that to then meet the market needs is something that we're trying to do. And, we're not going to get uh, rid of capitalism anytime soon, but we can think about how to meet these capitalistic needs in a different way, in a more regional way.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. Aggregating the small farmers, getting them to work together. That sounds like a great strategy. So you've touched on it a bit now, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about some of the relationships and partnerships and coalitions that you guys have built that have really helped you to accelerate this work.
Yeah, and I think this work doesn't happen in a vacuum, and we can't do it all ourselves. I think I'm a firm believer that working together, we can do more together than we can do alone. So when it comes to support systems for family farmers, we work with technical assistance organizations, the kitchen table advisors of the world, the Community Alliance for Family Farmers, the Albas and Salinas that prepares, up and coming and first time farmers that want to get from farm workers to actually start their own farm. So there's a network of technical assistance providers and capital providers that we work with. We as the Office of Cat Taylor, we have the honor to be working and having resources to invest both philanthropically through impact investing or bringing people together to have conversations is how we use our resources. So organizations like that, and then capital providers like the California Farm Link and Mad Ag and Pod Liquor Capital around the country that invest in these small scale producers, bringing them together, making the case and kind of amplifying the needs of these farmers, kind of starts connecting the dots of the ecosystem. But we work with everybody. And then farmers, most of these farmers that we work with, they're head down focused on their farm. They don't have most of the time, they don't have time to pick up their head and say, what are the resources that are out there? So we
Hmm.
take a lot of time with people on the ground to invest in really visiting the farms so they can actually see what the resources are out there that they can avail themselves to. So it's a big relationship building effort that we do, and I think the work that we do is very relational. So one
Hmm.
relationship leads to another, and I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to create is agency for these farmers to make decisions for themselves. We hadn't held them for a while, but I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that they build their own capacity, their own confidence, their own agency, and have the dignity that they need, that they want to actually make decisions for themselves. So that's the place that we want to get to.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. So you named a lot of different partners and groups that you're working with there, and it actually just makes me think maybe we should compile a list for people just so they can start to get more familiar with the different players that are working in
Mhm.
this ecosystem. Because yeah, there's I mean there's a lot of work to do in many different fronts, and so I think that kind of feeds nicely into the last question here. Something that I think a lot of people are wondering about is like, where can I plug into this? How can I get involved in this transformation of trying to make a regenerative food system happen? Most people here are not farmers. Maybe they, don't even have a garden necessarily, are trying to figure out where they can start. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that there's many ways, and I see I'm kind of looking at the chat now, and I mean there's so many great organizations out there. I mean, someone mentioned Roots of Change, and Roots of Change, is a great organization that we work with that right now is kind of taking charge in mapping out the middle of the supply chain ecosystem for farmers. Because that's, going back to the barrier, I'll go back to your question, but that's one of the other barriers is like for a small
Mm,
producer, the storage, transportation, logistics to get their produce from the field to the market is a big, big gap. So Roots of
mm,
Change is trying to map out the supply chain logistics ecosystem in California so that it could make it easier and connect and work together to connect the dots so that family farmers can get their produce from the field to market and really not worry about the supply chain needs. So I think that's one area, but I think there's so many ways. I mean, I don't know, there's all the attendees today, whether you're in finance, how work with your organization and your finance network to make the case that investing in agriculture is a good investment. It doesn't
mm,
have to be just the pot liquors, the California Farm Links, the Food System 6 organizations. Other uh, ag finance organization or finance organizations can invest in ag. And I think it's a good investment. So trying to make the case that agriculture is a good investment is one way to do it, and especially in a regenerative way. So in making investments that way, whether you're in education, um, how do you help the university systems, the school districts that make the case that they can procure from small producers that are farming in a regenerative organic way. And there's people that get involved in the organizations, volunteering. I mean, I think there's at the end of the day is all of you are on this call because you have a passion or a calling that you care about the climate. You care that growing food in a regenerative way is important to you. The best thing that you can do as a consumer, as an individual, is tell your story to say, look, I want my food to be grown differently. And that sends a signal to the market, whether it's a store, whether it's a school district, whether it's a hospital, you telling your story and you making the demands that you want your food to look and be grown differently makes a big difference because the market listens to that. So I think you sharing your passion of why this is important to you is actually it can go a long way. And I know it's kind of a cliche saying, but your voice matters. It really does matter, especially in this work in regenerative agriculture. Um, whether you're, in a small urban garden in your backyard, or you do work with farmers in a large scale, I think, telling your story and sharing it, and amplifying your local farmer, local farmers, amplifying their story is actually a great way for you to not only help the market conversation, but also uplift your local farmers.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jose. And yeah, one thing I want to add to that too, I would, encourage people to, if you don't already, if it's possible, start a small garden wherever you live, even if it's on your balcony in an apartment. Because I really think, growing some of your own food and knowing how that process works and starting it really will help you to start to understand, what is soil health, right? Like that's a
Mhm.
big part of this whole conversation here. And like you were saying, Jose, to educating the market, right? When people understand what it really takes to grow food, I think that's part of the education. Yeah.
Oh, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Daniel and
Oh,
Jose. This was really terrific, and you've left me with a lot of thought starter ideas. And I know, Jose, you could go on, all of us
Yeah.
could go on forever, and I
It's a
appreciate all
big
of your
conversation. Yeah.
contributions. Yeah. I mean, I'm walking away with the fact that we are to connect with community, and what great way to do that today than to have our breakout rooms. What a great segue. So we're going to bust into our breakout rooms. I'm going to put up some questions. You're all invited to join us. Please don't leave after the breakout rooms. We actually will have 15 more minutes of Q&A with Daniel and Jose, so we can talk about some other great things. I did see a couple questions come across that would be great to tackle in Q&A. Just a few housekeeping again before we move into the breakout rooms. Some regions may have more than one room available, so please aim for no more than 5 people in a room. So we're building community, and we want it to be a place that we can all communicate. So 5 people per room. If you see a room that's already has 5 people, please choose a different one. And we may also take a couple minutes to move people around, shift people around to make sure that everyone has good conversation. So I'm going to put up another slide here that gives us some questions to discuss in the breakout room. Just a quick reminder again, breakout room afterwards, we're going to have Q&A for around 15 minutes. Make sure that in your discussion, here's some thought starters to get going. What is one part of regenerative food systems that feels most relevant to your work, community, or interests? I think that Daniel and Jose touched on this. There's many different roles that can add to this big value chain of places to do impact. What is one concrete way someone like you could get involved locally, even if you're not a farmer or a technical expert? Grow that garden. And before you come back, try to identify one possible next step, connection, resource, or question that could help people in your region keep learning or take action. And we will post these in our chat, so make sure that everybody has that as a reference as we go into our groups. That would be great. Okay. I think the breakout rooms are being set up, so we'll give a second to be put in place. I know they're working hard to put us in the right rooms here.
I see that the breakout rooms are open, so we're supposed to join. Yeah.
Okay. Where do we find that? Okay. If this is your first time finding a breakout room, in the 3 dots on the bottom of your screen, there's actually a choice for breakout rooms. And you can go ahead to the rooms tab once you're in there. And you'll see the rooms are highlighted, and there's a way to join them once you've clicked on the button.
Oh, Julie, I think you're muted.
Thank you. So as we're all gathering back after our breakout rooms, we're going to have some great Q&A. We have a couple more minutes for questions, so feel free to add any questions in the chat, and make sure that we have our panelists. Daniel, I see you. Jose. So, yep, please add your questions.
And while people are adding questions, I just wanted to make a little plug for the Bay Area Food Systems chapter. For those people who are in the Bay Area, this is one of the first Work on Climate in-person chapters that's working on putting together figuring out some projects, some collective action for people to work on together to transform the food system in the Bay Area. So it's a great way to start getting more involved if you're in the Bay Area. And if you're not in the Bay Area, you can start a chapter where you are. If you're on the Slack channel, just go into the community feedback channel and ping Inball and let her know that you're interested in that.
Okay. It looks like we had a good chat question. How do you connect to farmers? How do you spread your reach? I'm not sure which one of you would like to take that question.
I mean, depending on where you are, here in the Bay Area, you can't look anywhere else. I mean, agriculture is around you. Even if you're in a place like San Jose, you're actually living on former agriculture land. Now it's buildings, but I think the best I think it's for me, it's very easy answer. It's quick research and like where are your farms near you? Go visit them, whether they're out in the Central Valley, where they're out in the, where ag is, or there might be, if you're in the city, there's urban gardening. Visit that too. That matters too. So there's urban gardens everywhere, and there's amazing people doing amazing things. um, Places like City Slicker Farms in the middle of East Oakland, you know, go visit them and learn what they do, and they connect to other farmers. So I think meeting one farmer leads to other connections. And then you start thinking, it's not always about the farmer, but like who are the processors? Where do they take their storage? Who are this cold storage, transportation? I mean, learn about the system is what I'm trying to say. It starts with the farmer, but I think learning about the system is really important too, like how they get their produce to where they want to sell it.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I don't really have anything to add to that.
Yeah. And kind of zooming out a little bit, one of the questions we see in the chat is, would you agree that there are two challenging paths to regenerative food systems at scale? One is to get big industrial ag to pivot, and two, to decompose or displace big industrial ag with small to mid-scale producers who lead the pivot. So if you have to focus on one of those, which one would you choose?
Um, Tillman, you're not going to like my
Yeah.
answer, 'cause I saw that in the chat, and I think it's a both and. I mean, you have to do both. Like I said earlier, I don't think we're going to dismantle, big industrial ag anytime soon. I think we can influence it on how they can do better, which kind of goes to a later question someone asked. Like sometimes this big ag kind of greenwashes the regenerative ag, movement, and you got to watch for that, and you have to, hold them
Mhm.
accountable. So I think you can influence big ag to do better in the way they adopt regenerative agriculture practices or where they source their food from. And you have to create these regional economies and systems that also contribute to the larger supply chain of food, of the food ecosystem, of the food system. So, um, but if I had to focus a collective effort, I mean, my passion lies in, I don't want to destroy big ag, but I want to decompose it, as you use the word, is, figure out a different way that it operates, bring in infiltrators like us to potentially work in big ag so they can influence from within on how to change their practices, how to change their values. It's a Herculean task, I know, but I think that's what a movement's about, right? I think the more of us that speak to these values and hold these values, in front of these big actors, is how we do it. It's all of us working together. So it is a both and, but the more people we have on really amplifying how regional ecosystems actually work, we start making the case that it makes economic sense for them to be valued as the same as industrial ag.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I'll just add a little more color. I think in an ideal world, we would have a lot more small local farmers, right? But it's hard work too, and I think a lot of people kind of romanticize it, and then when you actually go to do the farming work, you find out, yeah, it's hard and it's not for everybody. And so, how many people are going to actually go back to doing farming on a small scale? I mean, that's an open question. So yeah, that would be really ideal. And so maybe it's not realistic, and that's where we still probably are going to have big ag. And yeah, just need to hold them accountable.
And I think, can I say something else real quick? And I
Please.
think it kind of goes to a later question that I think Andrew Tomes asked right now. Um, that you're absolutely right. I think big ag is finding that in these times, for many reasons that we won't go, we can have another call around the issues that are leading to, increased prices. I mean, but we won't go there. But we're finding out that healthy soils actually lowers dependency on expensive external inputs like fertilizers, pesticides, feed costs, so soil health is both ecological and a financial asset. And
Hmm.
small farmers, regenerative agriculture is doing it the right way. And I think because of increased costs, big ag is saying, like, holy crap, it's affecting us too, and we have to adapt as well. So they're adapting probably for the wrong reasons, but it's forcing them to think differently.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it leads into another question. We were talking about like what is the biggest impact or influencer that you could do? And it kind of ties into the question of how do you get to connect restaurants and retailers? It's almost like that top down and bottom up. You got to
Mhm.
have big ag working and you got to have the bottom. So that was one of the questions is what kind of, what's the most impactful tactic and messaging to help that change?
Danny, go ahead.
No, no, no. You please take it.
I think for the narrative change, I think that an individual small farmer that's farming regeneratively needs to feel part that their story is not the only one. As I go to the Central Valley and I talk about how we're talking about right now, use the word regenerative. When I first started 2 years ago going to the Central Valley to talk to farmers, I started talking with this lingo of regenerative agriculture, and they're like, "Oh, you must be from the Bay Area, right?" And I'm like, "Ah, like touche. Okay, I get it." So you have to meet them where they are. Language matters, and sometimes the way they approach the work is different. But you have the tactic is that they're part of the community. So you don't use these words, but these other ones over here in the Bay Area that are farmers just like you're part of that movement as well. And I think that's a tactic that, again, for me, it's always been about relationship building and building trust and building community. And that matters a lot to the small family farmers.
Hmm. Yep. And farmers like to talk to farmers too. That's what I learned
Mhm.
when I was running my company is yeah, we farmer who was my business partner, we always had him out front and center talking to the farmers because, they would they would build rapport, they would get into conversation and understand what each other were talking about.
Terrific. I think that just about wraps up our time here. Um, I will share a screen here. We'd love your feedback. Thank you so much, Daniel, Jose. This was really a great conversation starter. It really sparked a lot of ideas, at least in our breakout room. I'm sure others had a similar experience. So thank you so much for joining our session, everyone. Please definitely fill out our survey here. Take a few minutes to give us some feedback, help us improve the work on climate events so we can support the wider community. Again, the shout out to the Bay Area. Please join our food systems community chapter that Daniel is heading. And you can do that by joining our Slack channel and Slack community. And if you're not yet part of Work on Climate, check out the link to our site in the chat.